Okay, this is a lot of light. Hi. So I'm also going to be speaking about calm technology, and I think Margot already touched on a lot, so that was really nice to watch, and thanks for that. I want to talk a bit more about actually a question that already came here from the side that's slightly more towards business models and KPIs, and how do we actually sort of shift the systems around it rather than just the interfaces themselves. So before I'll talk about that, who the hell is this girl in front of you? So my name is Nadia Piet. I mostly work as a freelancer, sort of between business and design. So it's this thing that recently they started calling service or strategic design, but yeah, titles. But I suppose that's the closest thing to what I do. I work a lot with Decoded, which is a technology education company. We basically help big companies sort of, get back in touch with everything that's happening in the digital world. Then I'm still studying, so I'm doing business innovation, currently doing my graduation project with MobGen, which is part of Accenture Interactive. Shout outs to my colleagues over there. Thanks for the support. And yeah, then I'm a bit of a tech nerd in disguise between all the, beneath all the business and design stuff. I'm a bit of a huge nerd, actually. So this is me like age 10, and this is me at age 20. And yeah, it's just kind of always me behind the computer because I just love hacking shit and browsing the infinite source that is the internet. And yeah, I'm just very fascinated with, I also did a bit of coding, started that when I was like 8, because that's kind of the only way you can do stuff on the internet at that time is to actually code it yourself. Never had the ambition to be a developer, but now that I'm a bit older again, I'm like, oh, I really like this techie stuff. And yeah, I kind of miss it. And so that's me. And in general, I'm just kind of fascinated by how we shape technology and technology shapes us. That's a very broad statement, but I suppose you all share that passion. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here today. So it's clear that technology has a big impact on us. The research on this is practically impossible because we can't find a control group. So think about this, you're a researcher, you have to prove something in a scientific matter. You have to find a group that has a similar living environment as all of us, but then without the smartphone, right? To really measure an impact. It's not gonna happen. You're not really gonna be able to find that. And so there's very little hard data on like the correlation or causation between digital technology and well-being. But I guess we don't always need the hard scientific stuff. We can just look around, and empirical evidence is kind of enough to see that, technology is shape-shifting the world in very good ways and not so desirable ways as well. This is a random photo series I really like by this guy called Eric Vickersgill, where he took pictures of people and then removed the devices from the images, and it just strikes me as absurd. And yeah, it's very fun. So yeah, also like Margot already mentioned, we've all sort of, started to take individual responsibility for this. We're like, my device is kind of taking over my life. Oh, what should I do? So we turn off notifications, we go grayscale. Some of us have recently shifted a lot to the voice notes, and of course all this stuff is really good, and I've been trying it, and it does, give you a different relationship with your device and sort of how it's helping you rather than distracting you. So that's a good place to start. Some people have even shifted to more radical alternatives like the light phone. I don't know if anybody's seen this. It's sort of like a reimagined phone, and it's kind of back to like the Nokia 3310, but then it looks more visually appealing. And some of us have gone as far as to go like on digital detox retreats. Whatever you got to do to disconnect, it's fine. That's cool. No judgment. What I'm just wondering is like how realistic is this? Like our willpower only goes that far. And on the other side of the screen of you trying to have like a healthy relationship with your device is a team of attention engineers. That's actually a job title now. It's kind of messed up. But people with like really good bodies of knowledge about the human brain and just behavioral science, neuroscience. We're only learning more about that stuff, and all of them are kind of conspiring there to figure out how to keep you glued to your screen, not because they're evil people. We'll get to that later. It's not necessarily their fault, but it is like that, right? It's kind of you versus like all these smart-ass people that are figuring out how to keep you there. So is it realistic of us to, put all this responsibility on ourselves? Not sure. I think no, but I'll let you judge that yourself. What is this? That's the sudden movements thing, right? And it throws you off. Yeah, so machine learning and AI will only amplify this, and I'm learning a lot about this recently, really fascinated by it. And obviously this will this team that is now maybe 10 people figuring out those tricks, it's now going to be, a supercomputer figuring out those tricks for you individually as a person based on your exact, psyche and demographic and everything. So that makes the fight, I think, even more imbalanced. One example of this, going a little bit of sidetrack here, but I think it's really interesting to think about this, is, so this one, it's called psychographic persona. It's like this ability that they're using, applying AI in marketing, basically. And it can kind of analyze your personality or, your character based on, for example, your Twitter data. So this one is actually my data. So if you see anything weird, don't judge me for it. But yeah, so it kind of pulls in your Twitter data, right? This is public. Anybody can pull this in. And it makes these assumptions about your personality. And the catch of this is that once they know these very subtle, workings of your mind, they can kind of target that. So say, okay, I am a very curious person, right? And I don't really care too much about tradition. Like, besides now deciding that they can target me with this ad, they could also do much more intricate things like showing me a slightly different text or showing me a picture of people hugging instead of a person on a mountaintop, or they can really, target things exactly to your persona. And that's what happened with the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, to whoever is aware of that. So now, insights like this even skew like elections and just historical events, not just which ad you're going to see. So it's from very small to very big sort of implications. That much about AI. I could rave about it, but it's not really what this talks about. So yeah, mostly last year, actually 2018, 2017 already a little bit. There was this, basically a lot of people started turning against like the big tech, like Google, Amazon, Facebook. So you already mentioned Tristan Harris. So that's a guy, he used to work for Google. And, he grew increasingly sort of, uncomfortable with his position there and what they were actually doing. And so he quit and started the Center for Humane Tech, where he's kind of spearheading this movement of, making ethical, responsible, helpful technology rather than persuasive ones. Then the Cambridge Analytica thing, then a lot of employees quit with Google and Facebook and Microsoft, and all the companies started going crazy, girl, the talent is leaving. There was a lot of stuff happening last year, and I think that's kind of why maybe this is even a meetup, because now a lot of people are sort of waking up to this reality and realizing that the fact we interact with this with technology is not just because we are whatever, we are poor at, self-control, but these people are actually working quite hard to keep us there. These companies have sort of admitted okay, maybe this is not the nicest thing we're doing. Integrated small things. So if you own an iPhone, you've probably seen the screen time app pop up sometime fall last year. Seems like a small intervention, but when you really think about it, it's already a huge thing, right? Apple can do this because Apple's business model doesn't actually rely on you to spend time on your phone. You already bought the phone, right? It creates the hardware and the OS. And that's why Apple as a company is actually able to do that. But say Facebook is not, because their income does rely on the amount of time you spend on the app, right? So Apple did that. Instagram did this one, which you're right, they did remove again. So they created this sort of stop moment. So there's this whole idea around when you're reading a book or, when you're interacting with sort of physical media, there's a stop moment where you're like, oh, do I want to continue to the next chapter? Do I want to see another movie? Do I want to? And digital doesn't have that. It's just like an infinite rabbit hole. right? An infinite scroll, infinite everything. So they introduced that. So they are sort of waking up to, users being discontented and wanting better technology. So that's good that we're at least making enough noise, for them to do something. So yeah, I think we need to admit two things before moving on. One is that we are hackable. So we like to think ourselves as like conscious agents and smart people that make well-considered choices all the time, but in reality, that's just not really the case, and we kind of have to get off our high horse and realize that we are very, persuadable and very malleable, not because we're stupid, but because we've all evolved in the same way, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, you would be long dead, and your ancestors would be long dead. The only reason you're here is because your brain works in a certain way, right? And as we're learning more and more about what exactly that way is, it's easier to target that. So yeah, we are very hackable and persuadable. And then tech is not neutral. So we like to think of tech as neutral, and I've heard people say this a lot of like, oh yeah, it's like a knife, you can like cut an apple or stab a person, or it's like fire, you can build a village or destroy a village. And that is kind of true because those things are closer to raw materials, right? And in a way, even the web there's raw material there. Things like code or just the infrastructure of the World Wide Web, like the cables that still go under the sea, because the cloud is not a real cloud. It's still just cables running through the ocean. Hey, Dave, nice to see you. Come here. So yeah, tech is not neutral. So maybe these raw materials like code and like the infrastructure of the internet, this is raw material, this might be neutral. But these carefully crafted interfaces that we're interacting with on a daily basis that are presented to us, they're not neutral. They're far from neutral. They've been built by certain people with certain incentives, with certain motives in a different, specific environment. And even when they're built with the best of intentions, I mean, I'm sure when they made Facebook and when they made the like button, they were like, oh, this is going to be the best thing. People are going to make so many new friends. So even when we do this with the best of intentions, there's still bias and there's still consequences that we cannot foresee, right? So either way, tech, by the time it actually gets to us, it's no longer neutral. So that is, yeah. So what I want to talk about today is a little bit of how do we actually get to a system that enables calm tech. So there's a lot of really cool projects, and I can share more with you. I'm sure you have plenty of them as well, of people that are thinking about what does calm technology look like? What do those interactions look like? How can we indeed use less text or more, natural sort of interfaces to communicate things? And that is very important to visualize the destination. What do we want? How should it work? But I think at the same time, we need to think about how do we actually get there? And how do we build a system that enables calm technology to be a reality? So bringing it from, an ideology into something we can actually adopt and implement in a financially viable way. So there's a lot of work to be done before we're there. But yeah, I want to, oh no, my emojis don't work. That sucks. I love emojis. I'm a total millennial. Yeah, so it's this one. I will just, it's that one. So just imagine it. So yeah, basically, how do we get from A to C, right? Attention to calm, instead of A to B. And what can we do maybe in baby steps to kind of progress towards, also a financial model, like a business model that enables these things to exist. So I'm going to do this in 3 bits because all decent presentations are in 3 bits, right? So I'll talk about like a business point of view, designer point of view, and user point of view. I picked these, like obviously the ecosystem is much more complex. I picked these 3, first of all, because they're key, but also because all of us in this room embody at least 1, probably 2, and maybe even 3 of these roles on a daily basis, right? So you're definitely a user of digital technology. You're probably a designer if you're here, and or like somehow involved in the business aspect of it as well, right? So I hope this is sort of, resonating with your context. So I'll start with business because it's the hard one. So yeah, I have an unpopular note, and that is that tech companies are not just or all or solely evil, right? We like to sort of scapegoat them and be like, yeah, they are the root of all evil in our society. Everything is messed up. People don't talk to each other anymore. People don't. Okay, this is clearly happening, but it's not just because they're sitting there tinkering how to mess up humanity. No, not really, not at all. It's just because they are economic actors in a capitalist system, in a digital environment that we have somehow crafted in a way where it's close to impossible for them to find a viable model without exploiting us as users. So I think if we want to genuinely move on to a solution, like a bigger system solution, we need to get this sort of perspective of they are just evil out of our way and see what other alternatives there are and think with them towards these alternatives to find a different way of doing it. So yeah, in short, also you touched on this again, but in short, the way the attention economy works, right, why these things work the way they do, is their company, their sole or at least primary profit is to maximize, or primary goal is to maximize profit. In order to do that, they need to maximize your engagement, right? Simple enough. It's direct correlation, so that's it. Their goal becomes to maximize your engagement. I'm going to skip to this one. So the max engagement is the business goal. It is literally to keep you glued to the screen, tapping, scrolling, whatever, doing those interactions, focusing all of your attention, intention in your screen. Human goals, on the other hand, like the things that we truly care for, that we want, are things like spending more time with our family, I don't know, picking up a new sport, learning a language, doing a far travel, things like this, right? These are goals we have. And the problem here is that they are directly in opposition of each other. So in some cases, with advertising or whatever, they might not be perfectly aligned, right? One might be a little bit zoomed out or amplified. But in this case, because our attention and our time is literally such a scarce resource, and we can only really spend it once, they are in direct competition for one another. And I think nothing captures this better than this. Netflix saying sleep is my greatest enemy. It is a tweet, so it looks like a bit of a troll, but actually the CEO of Netflix has repeatedly expressed this sentiment in like press conferences and stuff, that besides YouTube and Facebook, their biggest competitor is sleep. And so, and this makes sense, right? Like, it's messed up, like it's totally absurd, but it makes sense. They're competing for your time and your attention. You spend 8 freaking hours every day, if you're good. I hope you're sleeping 8 hours every day, sleeping. And so that's the time that Netflix is competing for. But of course, from a, human point of view, this is messed up. Like, you need your sleep. This is sort of the fundament of having a decent human life, is that at least you're taking care of your basic, physical needs, like sleep, water, eating. So yeah, I think this captures it pretty well at how they're, fighting for our attention and time. And that might very well be taking away from other things that are important to us. So yeah, to zero-sum game, either, now often we lose as the user because they're sucking our time away from our human goals, and we feel like we lose and they win and they're growing, right? But if you actually flip it and we do not interact with that, or we do not, provide them income, they lose. They will cease to exist because they're a company, they're not making money. Okay, they declare bankruptcy, bye, right? They will lose. And a new player will come in, etc. And that's just how the market works. So if we're not finding a different model, like to, create a different relationship between the user and the business, like a different dynamic, they will just go on to lose and lose and lose. They don't have a financial sustainability, and only, the shitty ones will survive, kind of. So we need to find a different dynamic in which maybe not we all win, hooray, hooray, but it is slightly more in balance. So yeah, that's in short, attention economy, and a more recent term, platform capitalism, which basically refers to, when digital came out, we're all like, oh yeah, sharing economy, everything's free, ha da da. But now we're seeing that even though it was intended that way to decentralize information and access, actually what has emerged are extremely centralized, bodies of power. So it's the same dynamic we've been familiar with all along. Can I say that? So what are the alternatives? Are there alternatives? So for a second, I would like you to think, just in your head, if you know of any digital services, products, anything you use that has a business model that is not advertising based and you don't pay for on a monthly basis, right? So like a subscription direct to consumer model. That's a very good one. Thank you. I love that. Yeah. Yay, crowdsourcing information. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just like for Facebook, it's free, but actually it's not free at all.
Yeah. Yeah, you pay in a different currency. Yeah. That might even be more valuable. But yeah, I'll get to that later. Yeah, so if you can think of any, Wikipedia is a great one. If you can think of any more, please send them to me, because apparently this is extremely hard, right? Like I asked a lot of my friends, and a lot of them work in like digital or innovation or whatever, and most of them were just like, huh. And there was just nothing there. And I find this shocking, like that we don't seem to have a range of business models or revenue models or sort of different ways to go about creating and capturing value at all. Like our imagination is just like this. So I'd like to go through a few. Obviously, advertising-based is the major one. Also, direct-to-consumer one is not necessarily bad. So things like Spotify, Netflix, Headspace, you like the service, you pay a monthly fee. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of them are freemium, right? So you get a bit of the content for free. You pay if you want the full access. But I feel like there should be a wider range of options. And so I looked for a few examples that I'd like to just discuss with you, and hopefully they can provide you some inspiration. So yeah, these are all sort of people, ugly slide, that kind of did it, or have found a different way of going about it. So I'll just go through a few. Patreon, I'm sure a lot of you know. So it's actually also a direct to creator consumer model. So basically a lot of vloggers or people that create online content have shifted to this. So instead of opting in for the ads on YouTube to be shown to their viewers, they ask their viewers to sort of send them donations. It's almost like an old school sort of basking street musician in the street model. But it's actually been really successful. Like there's thousands of people that are now able to full-time support whatever they're doing through direct support from their viewers. This one is actually really cool. I'm sure you all know reCAPTCHA, right? It's the stuff you have to type when you leave a comment to prove you're not a robot. And nowadays it's usually just like this tick box of I'm not a robot, but I'm sure you've all seen these, right? So they actually have a super interesting business model where these words, so say like the top right, the modern day Trista, these are actually images from old books. It's like from old, text that they were not able to decipher with computer vision. So computers can read text if it's, neat handwriting. Is everyone okay over there? Okay, cool. Yeah. Where was I? Yeah, so they took these old texts actually, and they weren't able to translate them, so they used these texts through reCAPTCHA. So when you as a user are filling this in, they know, for example, the word modern day. They know this is modern day. They know, like, this piece of text is validated. But the other one, they have actually no idea what it's saying. So they're not using that piece of text to validate your not being a robot. They're using that piece of text to validate whatever is in those books. And so while you're validating yourself on the website, they can use that whole database to transcribe text into, to digitalize text. So it's kind of double-sided. So both websites were actually paying to have the reCAPTCHA, so spam bots couldn't destroy their website. And on the other hand, institutions, things like libraries, universities, research organizations, were paying them to be like, we have all this text, all these books, and we don't really feel like, transcribing them manually. Our computer vision thing cannot read it. Can you put it in reCAPTCHA? And so it was creating value both ways and capturing value both ways. So I think it's kind of genius.
It makes me hate reCAPTCHA just a little bit less.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I never even knew that.
Every time I see it.
Yeah. Well, now the tick box, I guess it's slightly easier, yeah? So, and I suppose Wikipedia actually works in a sort of similar way where information is crowdsourced. Also, this one, Stack Overflow. I don't know if you guys know it. It's basically like a massive community online of developers. And a lot of, this is not like amateur developers, okay? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the lead developer of Facebook is on there. And they're sharing like huge amounts of just free code and helping each other debug stuff. And there's a lot of value being shared, all for free. And so basically, their business model is not so much focused on the revenue itself, but how they create the value. So by building this community, they don't really have to do anything. Like, they just have an online forum structure that's really easy to build and deploy. And then all the developers are just there creating like massive amounts of valuable data and information that was never before captured, because it's also not in books, because, then there was no developing when we had books. And so it's like the number one source of this knowledge. And when they sort of had this position, they obviously started building out with like relevant services. So now they have like job seeking features and things like that. And it ties in perfectly, actually, because all the developers are already on there. So say you are a tech company looking for talent, would you go to, I don't know, Indeed or Monsterboard, or would you go to Stack Overflow, where all the good developers anyway are already, right? So again, like a really, I think, a good example of creating value without sort of exploiting anyone in the process. This one, a bit controversial, but interesting nonetheless. So 23andMe, I don't know if you guys know it, it's the DNA tests, like the ones that you can buy for $100. You can do them at home. You send it back to the lab, and they tell you everything about your ancestry and your sort of health makeup, genetic makeup. And you can buy these for $100, which is probably not that profitable. How do they make money? Mostly with the data. So now they have the DNA of loads of people that nobody really owns except for nations, some of them anyway, some governments collecting that data. But there's a huge amounts of data that they can use for research. So again, this is where the debatable bit comes in terms of privacy. I can already hear you thinking, what they're using my DNA for, like shit. But say they're using it for actual medical research, that's a great thing. And now the researchers don't have to go out and recruit thousands of participants and pay them to show up and send their results to the lab, et cetera, right? They just get the data like that. And so you, as a consumer, have access to this DNA test. You're funding kind of these, medical research that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. Such a large database wouldn't be able to derive at the same insights and maybe produce like new medicine or, new conclusions about how illnesses develop. So this one is Friendsurance. The name, I think it's all already in the name, which I hate when companies have a name like that. But it's basically like a cooperative insurance. So instead of an insurance being this far, huge entity, you can basically build sort of like an insurance pool with your friends. So say we could all say like, okay, let's make like a ladies at UX insurance pool. And we all put money in there like you do with the normal insurance. But because you have a smaller pool, when we have money left after all the declarations, you actually get your money back from the big fund, which obviously doesn't happen in the greater insurances. And And this is also sort of this model, like it's a kind of an old model as well that we used to do a lot back in the day, where you just have small groups of people providing each other and making, agreements amongst each other to be safe without necessarily anyone making a profit. So there's that. Here is like a bunch of potential business models or revenue models, or don't stare at them now. Just take a picture or add me on LinkedIn. I'll send you to like all of these slides. But it's just to say, like, yes, it's really hard, but there is business models out there, or different tweaks you can do, like sort of business model alterations that can provide some sort of relief to this advertising-based exploitation model. So nobody really has the answers, but there's hints of things we can play with, So that was it for the business part. I have a lot more, by the way, so if you're interested in this, like, please just come chat to me or whatever, just be in touch, and I'd love to learn more from your perspective as well. So then the designers, as designers, I think it's really important that we're very aware of what state we're sort of in when we're creating stuff, and how we're thinking of our humans / users / customers / being. So a few random ideas about how we can sort of put ourselves in a different mindset when we go into creating digital products. So this one kind of ties into the KPI thing. So now what we're doing is mostly using vanity metrics, right? Like how many clicks, how much time, and just like maximizing all of those metrics. What could we do instead? So there's one research I did. Again, this is by Tristan Harris, the guy from Center of Humane Tech, the ex-Google guy that now was just like, no, that's him. So he partnered with this app called Moment, which is kind of tracking your screen time and everything. This was before Apple implemented that feature natively in their OS. And basically what they did was they asked users like how they felt after using a certain app or after spending time on a certain app, and how, happy or unhappy they were with them being there. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves. But I think this is a really interesting way to think about it, and actually it's given rise to this new term that's called the regret test. And it's kind of asking yourself, if my user, spends this much of time or this thing, would they regret like the time they spent? Would they regret this interaction, or would it actually help them? So how would they feel after the interaction? Would they feel happy and fulfilled, or would they actually feel a little bit dirty? It's a good question to ask. And then the other KPIs also that were mentioned before, things like customer loyalty, or just like general satisfaction, I think loosely linked to this, but I think this one is a very specific, quite interesting example. I'm going to skip this. I just want to, okay, I'll go through these first. So there's supposed to be also a triangle there, but that's okay. So I'm sure you've seen this before. It's kind of like UX needs, right? It's kind of like a Maslow's pyramid, but not really. It's what does a user need out of an interface in order for it to serve them. And generally, we talk about functionality, reliability, usability. And then recently, we've added this thing called delight, right? Like, it should be nice. It should make them like, oh, I kind of like this app, And I think that's cool. Like, that's already a step forward. The fact that we're even factoring in emotions into interfaces, that's great. Or, emotional effect into interfaces. But in reality, it often turns into like, oh, let's just add like a mascot, and we just put a monkey there, and people are like, oh, I love this app because there's a monkey there. It's it's maybe not super helpful on the long term. So I'm thinking like, what if we could add sort of another layer on top of that pyramid, and think about something like, how can we design for well-being, which is a more long-term sense of, contentment, meaning, fulfillment, health, mental health, physical health. how can we design for that? So when you're going through a design process and thinking like, oh, is this functional? Is this reliable? Is it usable? Does it bring delight? Maybe you could take a second and be like, is this somehow, supporting or taking away from well-being on a long term? Which is probably a whole discussion in itself. Again, but I think as designers, we're quite aware of of these more humanistic issues. And so just taking that second to ask yourself, I think could already take out some of the, small tweaks to make it more humane. So I'm certainly not the first one to come up with this idea. So there's a few cool people that are doing nice stuff around this that I just wanted to share with you. So this one is the Delft Institute of Positive Design. It's not focused on technology or digital specifically. They're basically asking like, okay, how can design actually help people live a better life? Whatever that means, right? But how can it actually be a positive source rather than just a functional one? And so they have a lot of different tools, but one that I quite like, I think is easy to implement, is this like card deck. And it's asking you like, okay, how could you design this thing for example, exploration? It's like, that's a feeling, right? And when you explore things, or when you're, done exploring things, it feels good. And not just good in a sense of like, oh, that was fun, but it's like, it gives you some sort of fulfillment. So they have this whole deck of these sort of nuanced emotions, not just happy or sad, but things like exploration, equity, intellectual creativity, that I think are pretty cool as a source of inspiration, to be like, how might our product, contribute or take away from this more subtle human experience? These guys are doing a similar thing, but much more academic. So if you like reading long ass papers, this is the only paper I've ever made it through, to be honest. So yeah, these guys are doing a lot around positive computing. So this one is specifically for tech and digital. And they came up with this graph, basically, that is thinking about your user not just in terms of the interface itself. So not just in terms of jobs to be done, right? What we call in design jobs to be done within the interface, but also how does it affect them outside of the interface, task, behavior, life. So say, I don't know, I have like a to-do app. Okay, the goal of the to-do app is for me to put a to-do in there. Okay, I did that. Now, great. User success. But in reality, in the bigger scope of things, is this to-do app really helping me to be more productive and more efficient with my time, or to be more organized in the things I need to do? I don't know, but it's a very different question to ask, right? If you just kind of zoom out and take a bigger scope of your user's context. So I think that's a cool one. This one is really fun. So when we design things, we intend a certain impact, right? And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Like when they introduced the like button, they genuinely thought that this was going to be a super nice, fun thing for humanity. And it, had some sort of unintended consequences. So these guys made the tarot cards of tech. It's from Artifact Group. It's just a website. And they have all these prompts that before you launch a product can help you to kind of think through what possible consequences it might have that you didn't really, consider. So it's kind of scenario building. It's very playful. So 2 of them are like, what happens when 100 million people use your product? Right? Like the scale of things might really impact the consequences. Or if the environment was your client, how would your product change? So these are just 2 of them. There's like, I don't know, like 30 of them, I think. So I think this is a really playful way to kind of think through those scenarios. And if you pick out 1 or 2 things, that's huge, that's really huge. So then if you don't like the playful stuff, there's again a slightly more academic, serious one. So this one's the Ethical OS Toolkit. It's very cool. It has a bit more, just substantiation, I would say, in general. So they've identified basically 8 risk zones in terms of technology and how that's currently developing, and then have applied all these like risk checklists I think especially the one for machine ethics and data ones are really, really good, because there's not much stuff out there around how to sort of do applied ethical AI. So if that's something you're interested in, you should definitely check out these guys. And then, yeah, that brings me to my final blob. Obviously, we are all users of this system as well, right? And besides turning our phone grayscale and just taking care of ourselves, of our digital well-being, there's a few more things we can do. So basically, when the internet came out in like 80s, 90s, you know, Tim Berners-Lee, like the founder of the internet, was like, yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to give all this information for free and everybody can contribute. And he had this beautiful utopian vision of a place where people would just share and contribute and learn. That worked to some extent. I mean, Wikipedia, yes. But then basically now it is no longer that, right? The internet is no longer a place you kind of visit and then kind of leave. No, it's digital ubiquity. It's like a fabric through society. There's no way you can take it out. And some people even claim it to be like a public utility. So this idea of free things doesn't exactly work in, you know, an economy where everything is digitalized. But, oh yeah, that's just the 5 biggest companies in the world happen to be all tech companies. But yeah, meanwhile, while this stuff was happening, because most of us have been around for a while, I don't think there's anyone like sort of under 20 here. But yeah, meanwhile, we've gotten used to getting stuff for free, right? Like, you're probably happy to pay €5 for a Starbucks latte, but if an app is €1, you're like, I don't know, that's a lot of money, you know? Like, why would I pay for an app if I can get it for free? Right? And this is huge, and this is, I do this too. I catch this in myself and everyone all the time. But when you think about it, we really do value digital assets very poorly, especially when you think about, you know, consciously for a second, how is this latte going to affect your life versus how might it affect your life if you do actually get a premium subscription on this app that you're using every day? Like, how might that improve your quality of life? But somehow, you know, because we've gotten used to this open source internet, we just want things for free, and yeah, it's kind of a problem. So this is a really cool project. Again, has absolutely nothing to do with digital or technology, but these guys, so it's called True Price, I don't know, organization or whatever, but this project is called True Price, and what they're trying to do is figuring out the true price of things. So not what it costs in the store, but actually like, how much does it cost, not just in economic value, but in terms of environmental impact, social impact, larger economic impact, like does it create local employment opportunities or all these kind of things. And I'm thinking like, what if we could do that for digital? Because like you were saying, it's free, but it's not really free. So like, what if in the App Store you would see this instead? Or what if you know, think like that? So Instagram, yes, it's free in the App Store, but honestly, you pay with 90 minutes of your time every day. That's a lot of time. Like, you could be doing a lot in that time. You could learn a new language, or you could just make more money. You know, so if you translate that kind of money you would make in 90 minutes to how much you're actually paying for Instagram every day, that's a lot of money, like you're sort of paying them indirectly, right? Yeah, they should be. Yeah, and I mean, maybe 30 of those, say, I mean, Instagram, it's not like all a waste of time. Maybe 30 of those minutes are voluntarily, and I'm like, let me just, you know, check up what's happening, and that's fine, right? Entertainment, information, it's there, that's cool. But then the other 60 minutes are kind of involuntary or unconscious, and we're kind of just like sucked in. So if you think even of these 60 minutes, even 30 minutes, it's huge what you're paying with. And then there's the much more subtle effects, like decreased life satisfaction, right? Like comparing yourself to social media. Again, the hard data is not there because it's impossible to research, but like we know this, like we experience this every day. Same for Facebook. Yes, it's free, but there is something you're paying with, right? Your worldview generally becomes a lot more polarized, depends on who you follow though. Doesn't have to be that way, but for a lot of people it is. and you're, giving out all this sort of psychographic persona data that invites people to just target you, whether for ads or for, more political purposes. So when we think about this, we don't just pay in money. No, we pay actually in a currency that is much more valuable, which is our time, our attention, our worldview, our mental health. It's you're all so serious looking now. Really like, shit. What? So, yeah, I mean, we all know this phrase, right? If you're not paying, you're the product. And so that kind of leads to this very unpopular notion that we might need to pay. We might want to pay, actually, because by expecting things for free, meanwhile, we damn well know there's a huge company running this. Like, these things don't produce themselves. These interfaces, they're designed, they're developed, they're deployed, they're carefully crafted. This doesn't just happen. So who's paying these people to do it? So we might actually want to pay to have technology that doesn't put us up for exploitation, but is actually in our best interest. There might be other ways, like all these crazy business models I've seen before. But even if that's not something we work out, consider paying for your favorite app, whatever it is, So another emoji has died and has made up another shape. So this one I cannot actually illustrate. I can't do a cartwheel. So it's the cartwheel emoji that I'm not that fit, so I'm not going to do that. So concluding, I want to wrap this to an end because I've been chatting for a while. No idea about my time anyway, but so there's very few answers. Like, I don't have any sort of 3-step guide or, best practices or blueprints on how you can get your product or your company from here to being super helpful for everyone. Unfortunately not, but I do hope I provided some ideas, some inspiration, some just different ways of thinking about it, and maybe some things you can take back into your office or, into your space and implement somehow. But mostly there's a lot of questions, right? There's a lot of big question marks still open. So I want to invite you to think about those. I'm not that smart, but it's a room of very smart people, I think. So, I mean, if we collectively think about this and just make small steps, I think we can start, sort of shifting that paradigm, even if it's in baby steps. So yeah, if you don't take anything else from this, I'd like to stress that design is the practice of shifting from a current situation to a more desired one. Doesn't have to be one future, can be different, there can be different scenarios that are good. It's not just one thing we're trying to move towards. But I think our role as designers is not just to craft beautiful interfaces with perfectly rounded, buttons. It's also to think about how to enable a system that will bring these ideologies into reality. And so if there's only one thing you take from today, I hope there's something you can do with that. Thank you. More dead emojis. This one emoji I can do. It's this one. Thank you. Okay, Marjorie, bring it.
All right.
Yay.
So yeah, thanks. Really interesting. So you talk about how as user we can have impact, as designer, and how can like company change, and which was in one of your slides, but you have a touch upon it, the role of governments. So my background as an industrial designer, like physical products are heavily regulated in the way they're produced and some of the impact. So how do you see the role of government? Because as user, we can impact, but nobody has changed the world by buying things, but more through like activism or like other ways. So what do you see the role of like regulations into that?
Yeah, well, to your point, I do think we can affect the world also by buying things, because actually in a capitalist system, purchasing is kind of like a vote. But that to the side, I do think there's a huge role for governments. The reason I didn't talk about it is because honestly, I don't know that much about regulation, law, policy, and so I wouldn't want to stand here in front like I know about that stuff. But there is some really interesting, things going on about that, like discussions. So a lot of people are saying there should just be a cap on how big companies can actually grow or how much power they can have. So not necessarily in terms of revenue, but say a Google is kind of, like interwoven into the fabric of everything, and that shouldn't be allowed. So it should somehow be chopped up. There's other people that are saying it should be a public utility, which I think is a really interesting thing to think about. Because of course the implication of saying like, okay, we should pay for things is that people who are not able to pay will not have access. Right, and that's a major issue. Like people in developing countries can now get on Facebook and get in touch, and they have access to stuff. And if we make everything paid, they might not be able to have access to that, and that's not okay. So some people are saying things like, say, Facebook or I don't know, Google Maps. They are public utility because to be a sort of functional citizen, you kind of need to use them, and so they should be kind of, taken up into a government body somehow. So those are two, sort of solutions people are proposing. Personally, I don't know, because really I don't know about law stuff, and I'm not going to pretend like I do. But I think the public utility ideas, when I first heard that, I was like, I never thought about it in that way, but it kind of makes sense. What do you think? Shall we keep that for the office?
Yeah, I think it's because, for example, I'm French, and I know that France has passed a law on the right to be disconnected. So your employer cannot, you can have consequences for not replying your emails out of business hours or stuff like that.
Yeah,
so, interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely a good place to start. Yeah, just in smaller context.
The second time, right?
Yeah. So I have a big question for you.
Okay.
I really like to see this. I really enjoyed your presentation, by the way. I'd like to see the split between design, business, and users that you did. I think a smart way to make it a bit more comprehensible. The business section specifically. Don't you think like the same issues will always keep coming up when we keep working in a capitalist system?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No, okay. Yes. We should all revolt against capitalism, but I felt like that scope was a bit too big for my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, absolutely. Like the same dynamics will keep showing up.
Yeah.
And we can only challenge them in sort of a smaller scope.
Then let's do that now. 23andMe and reCAPTCHA. reCAPTCHA is owned by Google. And
they've been acquired. But when they had this business model, they weren't owned by Google.
No, but that happens because what they're doing is in a capitalist system. And then now it's criticized because it's free work for training Google's driverless cars. 23andMe is acquired also.
Yeah.
By a pharmaceutical, which is using it to do medicines, and we all don't know for sure if that's like for the good or the bad, because that whole business model is also. So it's kind of like it keeps coming back.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and unfortunately, I do not have a solution for the capitalist system. I completely agree with your point. Yeah, and I'm.
Yeah, but so one thing you didn't mention, which maybe is interesting to mention, is B Corps, because that is something that started to happen a few years ago. So, like to give
Tell us more.
a kind
Come
of positive
here.
side note. No, like there's some like DuckDuckGo. Some of you might know them.
Yeah.
It's a B Corp, and Kickstarter is a B Corp, and you have like a lot of these companies that are like working in the capitalist system, but they get kind of benefits because they do something for the society indeed. But it's still it is in the realm of legislation and some. But I think it's worth mentioning because, like, at least I don't know of any examples where they did go wrong, because that is kind of like the whole purpose. Maybe there are, but I think it's a interesting direction.
Definitely. I wish you would have told me this yesterday. No, that's okay. Yeah, no, that's a great addition. Thank you.
No, mine, it's actually was going to make a very similar comment to that on capitalism and all those things. Because a part of the presentation made me think of like Bill Gates and the Apple guy, the one that's dead. Steve Jobs. Dead Apple guy. He's dead. Whatever. Sorry, Steve Jobs. Makes me think of
turning in his grave.
Yeah. On those news that they raised their kids like technology free.
Yeah.
That the kids didn't have iPhones or da. So 20 years ago, these people that are building up this type of society that we live now, they knew the consequence, so they were more aware than we. And then the capitalistic system that we cannot avoid. So, for example, it makes me think of I can't think of a more empathetic or interface or product, but I'm still part of a company that I don't really know of all intentions, right? I don't know that how this product is going to be used in 2 years from now. I don't know. I don't have control. We don't have control because we don't own anything. So what's your take on that, on kind of like designing and making those decisions?
Like influencing
to
from
make
the inside
yourself
out?
Smarter, but not necessarily the product or the design, right? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, you mean like to change sort of from inside out, like how to influence that? Yeah. So, I mean, meanwhile, while we're not yet revolting against capitalism, I think we have to one day maybe, we need to kind of play the game to change the game. So, some of these business models, they do allow profitability and, financial viability and also sort of doing the right thing, right? So I guess we'll have to fight. It still requires a sacrifice. Like they're probably not making as much money as they could, right? But they're still being very profitable. So I think we have to look for those. And I mean, other ways we can argue it is just like, using these arguments like your quality of user relationship improves. And so your customers become more loyal. And so they stay with you for longer. That's money right there. The talent, which is kind of, tech companies, one of their biggest challenges is sort of attracting and retaining talent, right? That's sort of their biggest asset, besides some algorithm things. But yeah, if employees are sort of leaving Microsoft, Facebook, etc., because they're actually starting to feel a lot of shame around telling their friends they work at these companies, which I've seen happening with people I know that are like, oh, where do you work? Oh, I work at Facebook. And like they feel shame, because it doesn't align with them. And so they might inevitably leave at some point, and that has been happening a lot this last year. And so that's another thing they can take into account, that's losing a lot of money. So I think while we cannot change the system, maybe we can just use of these sort of surface arguments to at least persuade them in return to, do more of the right thing and act slightly more responsible and ethical until sort of legislation kicks in and actually forces them to do so. But yeah, it's a very big question that unfortunately I don't yet have an answer to. Yeah.
Thank you. Where should I throw this? Oh my God.
Done?
No?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'll also be around, so.
Okay.
Hi there. First of all, thanks for your presentation. And I think there is something you can do. I went actually to an open source conference, and there were like 6,000 people, like developers, and they were all making alternatives for chat, for maps and things like that. And they were all lacking of designers. So they were all like, please help us designers.
What is this called?
There are like open source alternatives for like example OpenStreetMap, and for Chatter an alternative, there's Matrix. And all those projects have a lot of developers but don't have designers. So they're all like, please help us designers. Yeah. And there's something you can do to get to a more, because the beliefs are exactly identical to this.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, and you so much for your additions. I'll take them in for if I'm ever doing this again. But yeah, that's really good to know.
I will add a link because there's a whole platform for that for designers too.
Yeah, that would be really cool to check out. I might.
Developers are more human-centered than designers. From preaching all the time.
Yes, so human-centered.
Who are actually people doing something about it, they're actually
Yeah, the irony, huh?
the irony.
Cool. Thank you.